What's good, my boy? Been a while without a video, so I decided might as well get on here and try out something new that I came up with to make these videos more consistently. Now, the main reason why I haven't been making videos at all is I have a lot of zeal for it, especially since my coming into Catholicism. Like, it's just like a burning fire to want to get on here and yap and talk about all things religion, and religion encompasses a lot of different fields, so it kind of is a vast topic that you can connect different things to. And I just have had to kind of consciously stop myself from doing that. uh, I'll get into a couple of those reasons here in a little bit, but a lot of my time has just been taken up by my workshop, building stuff, selling it to try to make money. And then I've been getting more into researching about Catholicism, trying to learn Latin, so that takes up a lot of my time. And then, unfortunately, my curiosity within my arts of painting and music have really captured my attention as well. So it's all these different things I've been trying to juggle and come up with some sort of consistent routine to focus on them throughout the week. And that's basically why I haven't been making any sort of videos. And these live streams, uh, doing these live streams, the main reason why the last three videos have been a live stream, it's kind of lazy of me, but my computer, stupidly, I bought a Mac like a year and a half ago. I was like watching all this like music producer garbage content, and they were all using Macs, and I was like, you know what it'd be? So like live and chill and productive to have like a little Mac laptop that I can go room to room with and do whatever I want. Terrible idea. Really terrible idea. I've been building computers my whole childhood, and I just decided to do this, and my storage, two times now the storage has completely filled up, and I've restarted the system like so many times, just wiped it, and it just comes back. I've gone through so many forums. I've tried so many different like terminal commands. I'm at an end. I'm stuck at 20 gigabyte storage on here, and I don't feel like changing it. So the next few videos, that I do make, are gonna most likely just end up being live streams. All right. And now the thing that I've discovered that I want to do with this channel is I had this wooden box that I'd made when I got into woodworking a long time ago, and I had it just sitting in my office. And the way in the past I would make YouTube videos is an idea would come into my head, and then I would just sporadically get on here and just yap and try to create a narrative as I go with it. And while some of them I believe to be fruitful, some of them were really fun to make, a lot of it is just kind of regrettable nonsense that I spewed, especially early on in this stuff. So what I've devised is every time I get one of these ideas, I'll write it down on a note card, I'll fold it up, and I'll throw it in this box. And over the past week or so, I've had quite a few of them, and I figure whenever, maybe once a week or so, I'll draw at random a couple of those cards out of this box and just make a video about it, or a live stream, if you will. And that's what I've done today, is I've drawn two of these cards, random topics, and I'm going to try. I've also done the whole, let me see. I did the whole, what is it called? Presentation that I did before on the last two. Really helps me organize the thoughts on these videos. But today, the two topics that I drew are accepting the canon versus thinking everything is fake and gay. And the second one is, who is the they who is actually running everything? You hear these two topics all throughout the internet. I really let them eat me up at one point, where it was really all I could think about. And I find it very interesting as a topic. If we just think a lot of this stuff has been kind of boiling since around like 2020, right? All of us had just like a bunch of time to ourselves to just kind of do whatever we wanted at home. And that led a lot of people to going down all sorts of rabbit holes. Some people picked up an instrument. Some people found some sort of hobby. Some people started researching. Some people fell into like self-improvement and bettered themselves. Some people fell into religion. All these different places. For me personally, it was self-improvement. And I'm glad I did. I mean, it was a lot of nonsense that I was ingesting back then. But it was just a time of introspection, right? This whole pandemic era. Almost as if, like, we've all heard the analogy of, like, the machine. Everybody's in this machine, bro. Well, metaphorically, this pandemic was kind of like a time for everyone to be taken out of the machine, the cogs to be cleaned, and everyone given a chance to look around and see what's really going on. And a lot of people woke up to certain things. Lots of people dove super deep into conspiracy and have not resurfaced since. But a majority of people kind of got to look around and see what's really going on. Real corruptions, real things, and got to, as if you want to call it, discover themselves. So there was that. Also, there's this big thing with Gen Z, my generation. I don't really know the age in particular. I'd guess it'd be like 18 to like 25, maybe a little bit younger. But we have all these generations. I'll just go back to like the boomers, right? The boomers, a lot of people hate on the boomers because they were so propagandized with the Vietnam War, the 60s love movement and all of that. Also, they were like super, all this like, a lot of people consider them the naive generation, right? Then you go on to like Gen X through the 80s, and they were subjected to all this like the real fruits of that 60s love movement, which is just like this open, crazy, hedonic time. Then you get into the millennials in the 90s, and they're just nihilistic. They've kind of gone into that direction of thinking everything was fake and gay. And that's kind of what I'm trying to tackle here, is like you have these two pendulums, right? You have the boomers that took everything at face value. Everything's true. Not all of them, of course, outliers are there, but they don't disprove what I'm trying to say. They took everything at face value. They bought all the narratives. They picked a side politically and socially. And then within the millennials, I think you'd call them millennials, just the people in the 90s with the grunge and stuff like that, they just thought everything was fake and gay and were just so just nihilistic about everything that you go back and you watch interviews from like musicians in the 90s and they're so cringy. They're just like, yeah, like the goth kids in South Park, everything's so gay, dude. So you have these two extremes. And the beauty within our generation of Gen Z, I'm assuming whoever's watching this video is most likely a Gen Z person. We have the internet, and then we have this pandemic time period to actually reflect and see what's going on around us, to look around and see and form our worldview, which is one of the big things we'll get into once I get to the presentation part. Forming worldviews and how that actually is done. Okay? Now, lastly, before we really get into it, to really expound upon my overall kind of resistance to get back into making these videos, I don't really know anybody in real life my age that I can relate to within the Catholicism. Like all the stuff with Catholicism that I relate to and I find like-minded individuals comes from online. Most people that I know that are going to college or doing construction, they don't really care about any of this stuff. They find it to just be boring, pointless. They might identify as Protestants, but like 95% of people that I see or meet are just agnostics and don't really care about anything in general. They're not atheists. They're not any sort of other religion. They just don't care. And with this, for us converts to Catholicism in particular, specifically us converts, I see this a lot online. It's like this, like you become a convert and you get super zealous about the faith, and you just start like being so pious online, like posting all these quotes, doing all these things. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing inherently wrong with it. It is good to share the faith. That's what we're supposed to do. But in some sense, I am not just from my perspective, I'm not an apologist. I've been doing these presentations because I want to keep the Catholic perspective. But I know that I'm so green within the faith that it would be very easily, like whenever I'm yapping on here, I'm drawing from all these different, I'm just drawing from this source of information that I've read, watched, heard, okay? And it's very easy for me to just kind of be blasphemous or a heretic, especially with how green I am, to just dogmatically, like I can really put the show on and do Bible thumping type rhetoric on here. I've done it in a lot of my videos. But I find that to be like really cringy whenever people do it who don't have experience with the faith. There's one dude that watches my channel, Sean Pavlik, I think that's his name, full name. And he does a really good job because he has experience within it, and he can kind of draw upon his vast experience within it. And he doesn't really go super deep into like the theology or anything like that. It's just like the faith as a lifestyle almost. But you see, say you go on Twitter, which I try to avoid as much as possible, but you go on these platforms and there's people who have just been confirmed, and they're just like calling people heretics, battling Protestants and Orthodox and just all these different things, and it's just ridiculous to me. I mean, I'm guilty of thinking it myself. I'm guilty of like making a few bold statements, but as far as to like come on here and make some sort of dogmatic thing, I made a couple videos about it whenever I first converted, but other than that, I find it to be something that I need to avoid a little bit, especially in the sense that like this online religiosity is kind of abstract, right? I will go with people from my church who will come and hang out with my family, right? And it's all love. There's no like, dude, you're a Protestant, you're going to hell. There's a sense of charity there. And just like the internet in a secular sense of like, you see things like Call of Duty lobbies, all this different stuff breeds almost like a hatred and an allowance for it. Like it's just cool to do that. It's just part of the internet culture. That transitioning into Christianity kind of ruins it, in my opinion. It definitely goes against the teachings of our Lord. So there's that. I don't want this to be the face, try to be like I'm the face of Catholicism, or I'm trying to speak for the church, or that this is some sort of like anything I say is any form of catechesis or anything like that. It's not. These are just opinions within my perspective, which is very much formed by Catholicism, okay? So, let's get into this. Now, geopolitics, conspiracy, and Catholicism. Like I said, the two cards that I drew for video ideas are accepting the canon versus everything is gay, and who is the they running everything. You hear this word very frequently. Who is they? They are doing this. They are doing that. They are controlling the world. Some of the names I wrote down: the Jesuits, the Jews, the Freemasons, the royal family, some occult society, the Illuminati, Rockefellers, Rothschilds, giant organism. Who knows? We'll get into a little bit why, if you are a Catholic, you really shouldn't focus too much on this stuff. At the end of the day, none of it really matters, right? We'll get into that in a little bit. But those are the two topics that I drew from the box, and this will be a common theme within my upcoming videos. So, what should we believe? Who runs the world? And what should we focus on? Will be the video. Now, this idea of accepting the canon versus everything is fake and gay. This was something that I was introduced to. Well, there's always been like that level of skepticism, right? Before I was even Christian or anything like that, I always had that skepticism. I always thought like politics was pretty fake and gay. I always thought people who really cared too much about some sort of candidate or whatever, or like ruin relationships for that reason. That was kind of weird. Like, why do you care so much about these figureheads over someone personal to you? All of that, most people, or I don't know if I could say most, but a lot of people do hold that opinion, right? But I was introduced, once I started considering religion, and at the same time as I got into religion, I got really deep into the conspiracies. So I'm hitting both of these both of these topics, right? And I started developing for myself this narrative of like everything is fake and gay. And just like we touched on briefly with the millennials and the grunge era and how they were like the South Park emo kids thinking everything's fake and gay without really being exposed to too much. They were just hating to hate, really, on certain things. You get introduced to this narrative of the canon, as I have right here. We have this Star Wars. This was actually the first time I ever was introduced to the idea of the canon, was whenever I was like 14 and I used to watch like Star Wars theory videos, like all these like Star Wars lore. I used to play video games a lot, and I was into like World of Warcraft lore, all these different like made up little make-believe lores, and you'd encounter these people who are like, actually bro, that's not the canon. The real canon is blah, 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 blah. And it's like, bro, it's made up in this dude's head. But within the real world, it's not some made up fictitious world from George Lucas's head. We have an actual history. We have actual things to discover through science. We have truth, right? If you believe in truth, which I would say you kind of have to, especially, I mean, if you're a Catholic, without a doubt, you have to believe in truth. If you're a Christian, without a doubt. If you're religious, but whenever you get into like these relativist, atheist, agnostic types, and they just start questioning things like truth, it's like, it gets really ridiculous. And I'm not going to make this into some philosophy video or anything like that, but you are posed with this question: what do you start doubting and what do you accept? And I remember I hit this crossroads where I was watching all these like esoteric Christian types, right? People who were like, you can't be a Christian if you think the earth is round. You can't, adding all these like esoteric magical elements to the faith. Just really muddying the waters, if you will. They added all these different ideas from these different traditions, right? And then they were, like, the people who I was consuming were very conspiratorial. Like, they would sit there and tell you how, like, oh, it's this group who runs everything. All the history is fake. All the science is fake. And I see this as a common thread where instead of, like, actually scrutinizing and critiquing things through your worldview, you kind of just start doubting things. And where did a lot of this stuff spring from? A lot of it was from lies that came to the surface as being lies. Things like COVID, that people started, not the whole thing, but was obviously very, very weird. Why did this thing come up? All of a sudden it's the worst thing that's going to end civilization. Then all of a sudden it disappears like nothing. So you have instances like that. So you had COVID, you had other things that came to the surface. And I'm talking about this for like the normie type people who don't really get deep into the weeds with this stuff, but you had things like 9/11, you had things like MK Ultra, you had certain things like Watergate. You have all these different conspiracies, JFK, that were either never answered fully, really cloudy with how they happened, etc. And it has drove the one that we're told about, or this question everything, new Graham Hancock type stuff. Gods or no God? Which book? I mean, we're posed with all these questions, and again, we have so much propaganda, which we'll get into all of this as a machine in a little bit, but you have things like the Epstein, of course, like I said, Watergate, the Gulf of Tonkin, JFK, all the military propaganda, we want you, that type of stuff, COVID. You start to see how certain things in science fall through, or certain data is manipulated to prove a point. Certain government agency manipulation, like I said earlier, 9/11, certain philosophies that are just outright ridiculous and lies. All these things kind of culminate into a doubt, and people start just thinking things are fake and gay, and they stop believing in the canon, if you have it, right? So, what is I'll briefly show some of the categories that I'll use to define this, the canon, if you will. So, one of the things is materialism, or realistically the lies. Materialism and modernity. The history, what's the historical canon that we're believing here? Science, what scientific beliefs that hold this narrative together are we supposed to believe? Politically, what are we supposed to believe? Our worldview, all these things. What makes up a worldview? Certain elements of philosophy. Then I'll touch on how we actually learn and discern things. And then we'll get into the who is running the world category. So, now, materialism is one of the biggest things that pushes people into thinking everything's fake and gay, as well as modernity, right? What does it do within our Catholic perspective? It denies the soul and God's role as the source of being, right? It just straight up contradicts our teaching. Creation reflects God's rational order, and human life finds meaning and union for Him. That's what we believe as Catholics. But materialism just outright contradicts that, and that's been throughout the new atheist movement, throughout a lot of the 2010 era. This is what has been pushed, even really over the past 100+ years. This is what's been pushed towards, especially from the Enlightenment, right? You get these things like rationalism, and it promoting a little bit within these circles, instead of looking forward to certain religious activities, you're looking forward to the newest Funko Pop, right? You're looking forward to the newest movie that's going to come out, the newest episode of the TV show, and it's what is that doing? It's trying to fill a hole, right? So you have that, and it really just reduces our existence to a paradigm that's really just devoid of purpose, right? It leads to relativism, and you see this within a lot of the ideologies that it promotes. And it cannot account, this goes into the whole tag argument for God, right? It can account for certain immaterial realities, certain transcendental categories that we don't see but are universally there, right? So these would be things like logic, mathematics, other of these categories. You could say, well, let's just leave it like that for the example, all right? You have a justification for these things, right? Like how does one justify these things? Well, as a Catholic, or I'd even include an Orthodox Christian, or even I'll even give the benefit to other religions, although I believe that Catholicism in particular holds the most concrete of these systems, where you can kind of go point from point within a worldview, which we'll define in a moment, and it it holds the most sound. You start getting into these like atheist, agnostic, relative types, and you start questioning on these things and actually scrutinizing it, and it just starts to really fall apart. And people get really down and they start to think everything's fake and gay because of how much media actually pushes this idea, right? It glorifies consumerism. Some of the biggest figures within the last year have been these Andrew Tate types who give you the glimmer of improving yourself without any of the reaching for the divine. They give you this glimmer that you're getting better, you're moving towards, and there's a sense of progression. If you're just sitting there like playing a game all day, not doing anything whatsoever, just squandering stuff, and you start to actually fill that time with some sort of something else, it feels like you're doing something else, but instead of like actually going straight towards the source of or goal of what most people should be, which is, within our beliefs, union with Christ, right? It kind of just takes you up a little bit and then it just derails you completely. And this is just pushed in the media. You see it within the art, you see it within the science, you see it within all sorts of things. And then there's all these things that pop up that really consolidate this belief of everything being fake and gay. Certain things like, I put here the Snowden leaks, right? Remember that back in the day, Edward Snowden came out and exposed like how much the government actually sees in your life and pries into your privacy, right? And it just leads people to start questioning these things. And as we'll get to in the next couple categories, just outright reject all institutions, all religions, all things, right? Other things, 9/11, MK Ultra, COVID, etc. But the church's teachings are rooted in divine revelation and natural law. Like I said a second ago, they offer a coherent alternative. They are guiding humanity towards a very specific end, unlike a lot of these systems that go nowhere. And inevitably, within the materialism and the modernity, it leads towards nihilism, right? So, next is history. I've heard so many people, right? They start looking into alternative sources of history, whether it be like the book, what's that guy's name? Stephen Midford Goodson. I think that's his name. Last name Goodson, I know that. I read part of the book, A History of Central Banking. Lots of people will say it's just pure fabrication, lies. I read a good amount of it, but I didn't do the time to actually go through and to prove or disprove anything. But just like most secular history takes, I don't do that either. Most of us don't. When we go to history class, whatever we're getting told by the teacher, most of us are not having laptops, typing in everything he says, and sourcing it across dozens of different perspectives to come to a truth. We don't do that, right? But we have this idea, right, of a canon. And this is really what I mean by canon, is inside of the history category. The Enlightenment portrays history as this like linear march towards progress, right? You hear this term thrown about so often. Progress, we're progressing, or technology, we're progressing, right? And it frames religion as the obstacle. You have this idea that I've touched on in the last video of like Dark Ages, and the whole Dark Ages is like this series of like plagues and wars and just nothing in terms of progression. Realistically, you look into it, and some of the most progress was had during the medieval period, whenever the monasteries would form and a town would form around it, and all the scientific, and not all in the whole world, but within the West, all the science and all the advancements would come from those monasteries, from these people devoting their life to this, right? And as Catholics, we believe that history is this unfolding of God's providence. The church is the mystical body guiding humanity towards salvation, right? But within the secular world, this narrative is distorted. They distort history. They do not like faith, and it's eroded, right? And you see certain things like lots of foul play within intelligence agencies, certain financial institutions, documents get declassified, all sorts of things get shown, and then again, you have this media pumping of a perfect history, no inconvenient little bumps in the road, just a beautiful bow tied on it and everything, and so many conspiracies around it. And again, it just pushes so many people towards skepticism and eventually thinking it is all fake, it's all stupid, or along the lines of developing something like that. And as you see, I've put here, we have this timeline. This is the modern historical timeline with a 3 million years, first species, the Neolithic era, the ancient age, medieval, modern, contemporary, right? And it completely has no room. There is no room whatsoever for this to fit in that. This is just another theory from a book, or myths from a book, as they like to say, that just landed somewhere in this region right here, right? But the church, we have a sense of historical continuity, right? From the apostles to the from the present. This is kind of what pushed me so much towards apostolic Christianity, was this revelation that it's like there's an actual institution that Christ himself founded. It's not a man-made thing. It's instituted by Christ and furthered by the apostles and the members of the body of the church, guided by the Holy Spirit, right? And we have the magisterium within it. And it gives us, again, this really reliable framework where we can figure out what's true and not true, right? And there's tons of great scholarship for this. Next is the science. I'm trying to go through this because I don't want to make this another 4-hour video like I did last time. Science, right? Now, within the Christian paradigm, you have two areas you can go into, right? You have young earth creationism, and you have theistic evolution. Now, the people who believe in the theistic evolution, and I have not completely wrote my I haven't wrote myself into either one of these yet. I'm still trying to learn about both of them before I really adopt one of them, right? I've been reading a couple of books, though. One is this Ultimate Proof of Creation. This is for the young earth creation side. And then this one is a critique of Darwin's evolution, called Darwin's God. Both of these so far have been very, very good. The main thing within this argument that I see problems with is when you start looking into certain traditional beliefs, the common thread that the theistic evolution people will say is, oh, they just didn't have the information, so they didn't know. But whenever you start looking into the science, the beginning of evolution, like the whole purpose, the conclusions that it drew, and all this different stuff that's tied into it, and the people who have adopted it, it makes young earth creationism very appealing. And again, you start looking into the Bible, the purpose of the genealogies, the literal interpretation of the account of the 6 days, all these different things, and it's very convincing. Again, this is one of the things that I'm like the least into within my research, but it is very interesting. And I would say overall, right, whether or not, I'm not here in this video to draw any conclusions between the two. Like the young earth, I'll just give a brief in case nobody knows what I'm talking about. The young earth creation deposits that the earth is, I believe, 6,000, some accounts say 12,000, but around 6,000 years old. And you have within the timeline, You have Adam and Eve. You have Cain, Abel, Seth, Cain, the split, right? All the events of Genesis. And then you fast forward, I believe, to Moses, right? And that's 2,000 years after that. And then you fast forward to Jesus, that's 2,000 years. And then you fast forward to us, that's 2,000 years. Briefly, that's the narrative. And there's lots of evidence for it. If anybody's curious, I would recommend Sarah from Hamilton. He's an Orthodox person. A lot of the Orthodox, I don't think they've dogmatically declared it as their belief, but a lot of them favor it a lot more since it is the traditional Christian view held by people guided by the Holy Spirit, you know? Now, within the theistic evolution, they believe that God created all the different things slowly over time through the theories of the evolution that we have. It came to Adam and Eve being formed and so forth. And it really ties, one of the people, I don't know if you can see, let me take my screen off. This guy, John Lennox, right, was one of the first people who really got me into Christianity when I was like super agnostic about it. And his whole thing is that science doesn't disprove God. And I was very much in that mindset, right? And his whole thing is he hearkens to people like Newton. He hearkens to like all the, before the Enlightenment, most of the philosophers, most of all this stuff. They had this narrative that you're discovering something. You're discovering principles that are in the universe, right, through science. That's what science is for, to understand God and how he constructed this. And it was only during the Enlightenment and the time after that by certain scientists, certain analytic philosophers, certain skeptics like David Hume, that we come to this narrative that I pose here, right? Darwin's evolution, the deep time cosmology, stuff like that, right? And as Catholics, as Christians, we believe science, when it's aligned with reason and faith, uncovers the order of creation, right? Genuine science reveals God's rational order. But then you get to the modern scientism, and it posits that it contradicts that religion and stuff like that is basically like a roadblock that contradicts the Bible, or contradicts science, right? So, many of us, like this is kind of where I brought up that context of young earth creation, is that many Catholics, many Orthodox, a ton of Protestants, a lot of the apologetics within young earth creationism that I found has come from the Protestants. And most of us interpret Genesis literally. It's the Catholics and the Orthodox who have this system of the senses of Scripture, right? We believe in the literal sense, but then we also have three other senses. And a lot of the modern Catholic views, especially the people who I put here, a lot of them resist these views because they know that publicly they're going to get annihilated for it by other scholars, right? But a lot of traditional and modern Catholics hold a literal interpretation for Genesis, right? Suggesting that 6,000-year timeline that I said. And it's people like church fathers like St. Basil who held that God created ex nihilo and that held Adam and Eve as historical figures, right? And whether or not I choose, right? People say there's still room for Adam and Eve to be historical figures within the theistic evolution, right? I'm finding it very hard to reconcile there being the idea of death before the fall, right? This is the traditional view of plenty of church fathers that death did not occur until after the fall. And whenever you take these narratives away, it starts to crumble a lot of that concrete metaphysical meaning that I said earlier, religion holds. So, other things like Darwinism, they rely on unproven assumptions They contradict this framework. Evolution's claim of an unguided process denies divine teleology, while deep-time geology lacks direct observational evidence. Scientism's reliance on naive empiricism, all knowledge from sense experience, is incoherent. Like I said earlier, they can't justify these unifying invisible principles like math, like logic, all those things, right? This points to a non-material rational order, i.e. God, right? The media promotes this scientism. Who can we think of? I remember being in school, being on Bill Nye, being on DeGrasse Tyson over here. All of these different people in school, and this stuff is only allowed, right, because of this Enlightenment era, take the religion out of school belief. That's the only reason why this stuff is even allowed. But they kind of just push under the rug a lot of these perspectives from religious people. Lots of things just have evolution as a complete fact, and they don't mention any sort of speculative nature about it. And honestly, again, it really just pushes this contradiction of God versus science narrative. And it's just not there. I suggest many of you, even if you're Catholic, to go. I think he's Anglican, to watch some of John Lennox things. He's debated people like Dawkins. He's debated Hitchens. He was one of the OG Christians back in the whole new atheist movement, right? Also, a lot of this modern science with the empiricism, what I find, and a lot of others have found, is that it focuses so much on physics that they just forget about metaphysics. Some of them, like Bertrand Russell, go as far as to completely discard it, especially people like Dawkins, who makes fun of it a lot of the time, his whole fairy tales, myth type things. And in reality, you need these in unison. Now, there's been certain things of misconduct, like I said earlier, manipulated data, lots of exposure of these ideas that I'm talking about right now. Like, a lot of this stuff is speculative. A lot of what is consciousness? Nobody can prove what it is. The best explanation for it that you can find is that reality is an illusion, which is preposterous. But that's the best scientific thing, is that it's all an illusion projected from your mind, right? And but people are still like, well, what is it? So they go looking and they start finding all the answers within religion, particularly Christianity, right? And if they don't do that, when they start questioning things like consciousness, and they have certain experiences, spiritual experiences, or psychedelic experiences, God forbid, you shouldn't be doing that stuff, but they have these experiences where they're like, whoa, there is something more than just everything's an illusion and nothing matters, dude. They start to, again, reject everything, and this pushes people into this everything is fake and gay narrative. But the church comes to the rescue again with the faith and reason. I recommend y'all to go read St. John Paul II's encyclical entitled Faith and Reason. And it just goes to affirm that true science complements our revelation, right? And I truly believe that we must defend and not let die out certain of these things like young earth creationism. Even if we are an theistic evolution believer, we must preserve these traditional views. Now, politics and worldview, right? This is another one that this is like the main one that people start to think everything's fake and gay, and they start to become nihilistic with. You see this corruption within especially the presidency here in the United States, right? they seem like they have so much power, they make all these promises, and then nothing ever really happens. Nothing ever changes besides gas prices go up. You see all these relations, you see wars happen, and it just feels like puppets on a string, all sorts of crazy things. And, yeah. These systems, whether capitalist or collectivist, they are often controlled by these global elites who we will try and attempt to identify. I don't really think there's a particular group that you can identify within this, but we're going to try later. This manipulation, really, it's all about maintaining power. That's what one of the big narratives that we're going to talk about later on is this idea of like there's not a common good. It's all just about power, really. But the church, right, it teaches striving for the common good. They emphasize that political authority must reflect natural law, right? We have human dignity as a very thing high up, or a thing very high up on the totem pole. And above all, like I said earlier, none of this, whether it be comparing these things, like who is the they running everything, is everything fake and gay, or should we just blindly accept the canon that we're given? Realistically, within the Catholic paradigm, none of that really matters, right? It doesn't matter if there is some cabal running everything within the world. None of this matters because we believe Christ is king, right? We believe that none of these things, earthly things, can persevere through that. Yes, we like to kind of try to curate our experience to be good. We want people on our side to be in charge and win, and we can try to make that happen, right? We can advocate for that. But for the most part, going into despair, starting to doubt everything as you know it, thinking everything is fake and gay, as some of these people get into, even nihilism, is not only a grave sin. Being in despair is a grave sin, but it's just ridiculous, right? And it doesn't matter. But you have certain examples, which we'll get into in a little bit once we get into the who controls everything. Certain institutions like the Trilateral Commission, they have shown elites shaping policy all for the grasp at power, right? Certain documents have confirmed many different agendas. Again, like we touched on earlier, so much stuff has come to the surface, and so many people have had so much time since COVID to realize these things, as well as certain medias leaning a lot, like Twitter, leaning a lot to just showing these things. They get really crazy. I mean, you get into conspiracies that are just so outlandish that it's just almost humorous. But there's been a lot of leeway that's allowed for people to understand what's going on and all this stuff. And again, it makes people either think everything's fake and gay, or people will just blindly believe everything. And what I'm really trying to promote in here is this Catholic paradigm of not too hot, not too cold. There is a concrete methodology to understanding this stuff and dealing with it, right? Now, within the paradigm of worldviews, this is a very important thing, because we'll get into the elements of what constructs someone's worldview, which is a very particular set of things. But the church teaches that reality is ordered by God and God alone, okay? Humanity's purpose is fulfilled with unity with Him, right? That is our purpose. Like I said before, a lot of these people, whether it be the materialism, the Tate hustle culture lifestyle thing that's pushed as like one alternative to the scientism and all this, just accepting it, they don't have an end, right? Their end is do things that make you feel good. It's just pure like hedonism. The church is the only one that actually has a full-blown purpose. And like I said earlier, a concrete metaphysic of everything. I'm not kidding you. The beauty of this is any questions you have, you can look them up with the keyword Catholic perspective, traditional Catholic perspective, and I guarantee you can, whether it's a Bible verse that you're like, whoa, 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 Exodus 20, verse 24, where Moses is in this inn, and God comes down and is going to kill him, and then his wife circumcises his son and touches the foreskin on the feet. Whoa, 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 what does this mean, bro? This is like the craziest thing I've ever seen. You research it, and there's a complete within context answer for it. All right? And this same thing is all throughout the religion. It's all throughout the system. It integrates the metaphysics, the ethics, and the epistemology beautifully, unlike any sort of atheistic empiricist will ever be able to do. It's all speculative. It's all relative. Blah, 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 blah. Right? They always fail to do this. But unfortunately, the thing pushing people towards this doubt, this despair, is how much the media promotes all these things. They portray. I have friends who can't believe that I'm this interested in Christianity, let alone Catholicism. It's so cringe and gay. Bro, it's the most bottomless, concrete thing you could ever find. It's the biggest mansion that you can wander around and explore for years. I mean, it's beautiful. But they portray it as just something outdated, something, who cares, bro? And it's all just propaganda. And it's, again, when we get into the elites, they have this agenda, again, we'll identify the they, to erode faith. And certain conspiracies exposing this manipulation lead people to think all systems are inauthentic. Now, what makes up a worldview? The German word explains this idea of worldview much like most of these foreign language words that we try to translate into English. Now, I might butcher the pronunciation, but it is Weltanschauung, something like that, German, right? Weltanschauung, and within linguistics, you have these terms within either Latin, mostly like Latin or Greek, and there's certain words like the word nous. The Orthodox adopt this word nous when they talk about consciousness, right? Certain words that encapsulate whole ideas within just the word, and Weltanschauung is one of those. But for now, we'll use worldview, and another example is the word Zeitgeist. The Germans have this word Zeitgeist to mean basically the spirit of the times. You have people like Jung who really capitalize on this word when they talk about the collective unconsciousness and all his wild theories that he had. But just for the sake of this, we'll use worldview. Now, what consecrates the worldview? Well, first off, all right, we'll go from the simplest to the more complex. Firstly, you have your personal experience and your reflection, right? Individual experiences, certain introspections you have, certain inquiry, things you're interested in that you go and you research, personal reflection, chewing on ideas, stuff like that. Experiences shaped by your environment, your parents, your friends, the place you were born, relationships, right? Next would be things like your education, intellectual influences, formal, informal education, YouTube versus what you learn in school, books, teachers, certain traditions. They all really form the worldview. This is what most people think of when they think of worldview, is those two things plus culture and historical context, the environment, certain historical narratives like what you're taught in school. And this is the main thing that makes people think everything's fake and gay. They go to a certain school and they just give you this narrative that's very cookie cutter. They don't include room for any of these conspiracies or any sort of these questions or any stuff like that. So whenever you are away from that narrative and you start exploring on your own and you're exposed to all this stuff, you're like, whoa, bro, they lied about all this. They lied about it all. It's all fake and gay. Everything must be fake. And you lose the plot, okay? Other things like societal norms, right? Culture, the media, propaganda, if you will, that you're shown. But the two major things that people don't think of whenever it comes to worldview, and this is really, it's a system. Like you can analyze a worldview like you can analyze a math problem, or a musician can decode a song onto a piece of paper and using music theory. There is a system that is that scrupulous that exists, but most people don't think about it. So one of them will be the philosophical presuppositions. These are the foundational beliefs, axioms that underpin how one reasons, right? The popular categories here are metaphysics, the nature of reality, what consists beyond what we can see, beyond physics, metaphysics, what consists in that. Epistemology, how do we know things, how do we come to truth, etc. Ethics, right and wrong. Those three categories, and I'm going to preach this till the cows come home, are the most important aspects to one's worldview in the formation of it. Like I said, all of these three things, culture, education, personal experience, historical context, these are what most people think of when they think of a worldview. But a worldview is can be shown much more on paper than that. Most modern worldviews are built on, like we've touched with the modernists, the atheists, agnostics, flawed presuppositions, right? The empiricism. All knowledge comes from this sense experience. These are the people who throw metaphysics out the window and jump into physics like most of the modern world has done. Okay? The materialist naturalism, like I just defined, is the focus on only this physical, sensual world. But this is the modern look through certain analytic philosophers, skepticism from the Enlightenment. All these things have really contributed to this belief. But when we look through history, we look within our Catholic paradigm, which, I mean, very much so, especially when you read Aquinas and his influence from Aristotle, and Augustine with his influence from the Platonists, right? You see that their worldviews are very much grounded in this metaphysical realm, and they very much so understood transcendental categories in a order, in a structure of these categories. And it's the thing that builds up this epistemic justification of something like Christianity compared to something like atheism. But most people, whenever they argue these things, none of this stuff is ever brought up. The only things brought up are hermeneutics. Oh, bro, you really believe that they parted the sea, dude? You really gonna believe in that? Can you see it? And it's like, I mean, I believe in so many things that they taught me in school that I never did an experiment on or researched any further, but I ingrained it into my beliefs. And then these beliefs are shattered, and then people think everything's fake and gay, and they disregard everything. And the last thing that makes up these worldviews are the theological and the religious beliefs. The existence of God, the nature of the soul, the purpose of life. I mean, this is the most cliche question whenever someone thinks about philosophy. What's the purpose of life, dude? Like, that's the most... And people think it's gay to even talk about that now because of how cliche it is. And it's really because of the indoctrination, the propaganda, that there is no purpose, dude. We're just here to nut and pass on DNA. Really. That's the best they could come up with. It's wild. A worldview without this theological foundation lacks the ability to account for truth, morality, or meaning. Again, it goes back to this presupposition. How do you say anything is bad or good? These people, like when you talk to an atheist, right, they'll say, how could you believe in Yahweh? Did you see he was like killing babies in numbers and doing all this crazy stuff? And it's like, you're going to be very much analytical with your assessment of my beliefs. Let me do the same to you. How do you even justify good and bad? Then you play that whole presup game with them. How do you even justify logic or coming to these conclusions or truth? You don't have the answer for it, right? Spoiler, the answer for that is we get them from God, okay? Now, the Christian worldview posits a purposeful cosmos ordered by this divine mind. Like I just said, we get them from God. But the modern ideologies like Darwinism, they reduce humans to just this chance and matter passing the DNA. That's the only purpose. You get so much into the weeds where you start to see the doomer perspective, where they're like, dude, we're just like a plague upon the planet, and like we're the worst thing that could have ever happened. We just kill and ruin everything. It's like, no, bro, we were put on here to bend it. We were here to be basic. Well, as it says in Genesis, we're here to tend and name and basically be in control of these things while God is in control of us. And through the fall, lots of things get corrupted, but that's the true purpose, right? But all of that is lost within these other paradigms. The next thing is philosophy. Catholic philosophy, as articulated by people like St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Augustine, it integrates this idea of reason and faith. Again, science does not contradict religion and vice versa unless the science goes into this purely physical only, like Dawkins-esque belief system. The materialism, the nominalism, and the Enlightenment empiricism, they deny transcendent realities, reducing knowledge to just this sensory data. They are incoherent, and they, again, like I put earlier, cannot account for logic, morality, or meaning. And they just, without presupposing God. I've been really into this transcendental argument kick for a while. I was thinking about my next couple videos. Next one I'll probably do, besides this whole like drawing the cards from the box thing, will be I want to do a video on this book that I've been trying to get through, The History of Western Mysticism, and Esotericism by Cambridge, the handbook. I really, really enjoy their timeline that they construct with that. Some of them get off a little quacky, but I enjoy the timeline of how they present these ideas and how they influence, right? And then the next one that I'd probably want to do is like all my arguments for God that I really find interesting. So, but only a Catholic worldview grounded in the Logos, the Word, provides a foundation for knowledge. For example, the laws of logic presuppose a rational order that reflects God's eternal law. The media promotes this relativist, empiricist philosophy, and a lot of narratives in film as well as in literature, they glorify subjective meaning over this idea of universal principles, categories, transcendental categories. And there's also conspiracies revealing elite influence in the academia, which has led some to reject this mainstream philosophy as propaganda, again pushing people into thinking everything's fake and gay. The church's tradition, though, offers a rational framework, and we are encouraged to engage with these things to kind of counter it and guide skeptics towards the faith. Now, how do we learn? How do we discern? the non-Catholic Christianity, you find, let me turn my camera off, you find a lot of these like schizo videos that speak as the mouthpiece for what they call Christianity. And we'll take a certain look, and these are peppered all throughout. You'll find like ghetto kids literally on there like, we was from Atlantis and we built the pyramids, dog, to the earth is flat, God is in the North Star, to all this crazy stuff. To Jesus went to India, several different crazy things. One example is this. Let me see. I don't know if it'll play. I doubt it will play. Oh.
The North Star is God's throne room. This also proves flat biblical Earth. First off, we know Polaris has never moved.
These like schizo videos. I'm not even going to play the whole thing. But we have Joe Rogan, people getting their education from Joe Rogan, people getting their education from Twitter and TikTok, and people getting it from YouTube Shorts or endless podcasts. Instead of going to the source, we must go to the source. All right? Not saying everybody needs to be some like scholar reading a book a week like Lex Friedman or something like that. But this is the most pure way to educate ourselves. So how are we to learn and discern? First, in my opinion, we must understand metaphysics, logic, and epistemology. It is the only thing that helps you navigate all this modern propaganda if you're still going to be plugged in. Without being grounded in these things, you're very susceptible to all the manipulation, right? I would also encourage study philosophers like Plato, Aristotle, some of the pre-Socratics, and mostly, though, the Christian thinkers from Augustine to St. Thomas Aquinas, to even to a lot of the medieval manuals, Catholic manuals, scholastics. I would even encourage a little bit of like the Orthodox figures, like I would say St. Maximus the Confessor. He's got some pretty good stuff. There are numerous different things to educate yourself on instead of just buying into some narrative. And these things are a lot more concrete. They've been around for thousands of years, and they're not going anywhere, so you can take your time with them. They're not some like trendy little esoteric idea that's going to change next week. So read these primary texts rather than rely on some sort of secondary interpretation. Propaganda thrives on uncritical acceptance of narratives, especially pushed by the media, so you have to protect yourself from these. Practice certain reasoning to identify contradictions in these narratives. Plato's Republic, Phaedo, Timaeus, Aristotle's Metaphysics, works by St. Thomas, certain philosophers. I would really recommend avoiding a lot of the 19th century philosophy, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche. A lot of that stuff is crazy. It will impact your soul and weigh it down. But these are the things you want to really go after. Limit exposure to these platforms, these algorithmic driven platforms, YouTube, Twitter, TikTok. I would say I don't have TikTok. I don't use shorts. You're not gaining anything. Instagram shorts are incredibly funny. I mean, you get on there and some of the funniest things I've ever seen is from Instagram reels. Albeit some of them are very racist, some of them are very offensive. But some of the most context-driven funny things I've ever seen. But it comes to a question of what is the best for me. And in my opinion, it is to just kind of cut out reels. Maybe once every 3 months to dip into the zeitgeist. Go on there and see what's going on. Twitter. A lot of people use Twitter every single day. I don't have it on my phone. I make myself log into it through the browser. That's just one example of how you discipline yourself with this. And I'll go on there maybe once or twice a week. But most of Twitter is just crazy lizard people level conspiracy hating people, eugenic pushing stuff, and just an absolute cesspool of sin. So I would really highly recommend being disciplined with those, and don't spend all your time watching YouTube videos either. So now, who is running the world? Now we get into this category again. Christ is king over the world. Christ is the one running the world. Modernity wants you to think that materialism and earthly things are all there is. Stay scared of some boogeyman instead of furthering in virtue, gaining skills to serve others and being charitable. You got to think that there's dark force, that there's some big, nameable, identifiable dark force that you got to dig like a cat burying its shit. You got to dig to find the bottom of, waste all your time on these things, waste all your stuff. No, there are dark forces. Satan is a force, right? There is cabals and global powers. But at the end of the day, none of it matters because it only affects us as much as we believe that it has influence over us. Christ is king. He should be our refuge. But to just go with it, I've listed out several different things, and we're going to go through these quickly because I've only almost been on here for almost an hour or something now, and I want to get off. The last 4-hour video, that was rough doing that in one take. So the Illuminati is the most commonly known one. Most people know this one. 12-year-olds know this. All the celebrities, Jay-Z, all the Hollywood people, Illuminati. It's the baseline one that people use as like a card name, a placeholder name for who controls the world. And it's a real organization. A lot of people say that it's not real. It was a real organization, Freemasonic type organization, secret society during the Enlightenment movement, 1776. People say that it was officially crushed in 1785. There was a bunch of people in it, politicians, tycoons, everything like that. People claim that it's still that way. You're never going to know. You're never really going to know. Some of their themes are secrecy as the elite's weapon, hiding their motives, the Enlightenment ideals as this Trojan horse, pop culture as their propaganda arm, symbolism, all this different stuff. Again, you have the triangle hands, the celebs and the occult, Bohemian Grove. It's the most mainstream idea of they, and it's very much drops off with any scrutiny. Next is the Freemasons. I did a 4-hour video on the relationship between Catholicism and Freemasonry, trying my best to avoid conspiracy theory, and I believe it was pretty rigorous. It might be really slow. You might have to put it on 2 times speed to really get through it. But if you're really interested in the history of Freemasonry, the actual beliefs and the actual disagreement within the faith and Freemasonry, I encourage you to go watch that video. But briefly, this is where the ideas of the control comes from within Freemasonry. As we know it, started in 1717 in London, branched out from there. It was rooted in medieval stonemasons. There's lots of occult, Kabbalah, and ancient mysticism within the names of the ranks, within all the different things that they do. You don't have to be a Kabbalist or an occultist to be a Mason. Many of them believe that to be silly, but a lot of the traditional things are rooted in it. Lots of conspiracies paint them as the step up above the Illuminati as the actual people running everything. In reality, your grandpa's a Freemason. He goes there, they do their little things, they eat sandwiches, they make jokes with each other, and it's the Protestants' version of the beautiful excess we get in Catholicism of the sacraments that our Lord and Savior gave to us. But within the Protestant paradigm, which a lot of Masons are Protestants, what do you get? You get a boring Baptist church with a boring pastor, and people seek for other things, hence you get Freemasonry. you have certain things like the handshakes, 33 degrees, members like George Washington and Mozart, and all sorts of Twitter posts linking them from everything from JFK to into doing like Kundalini sex magic. Lots of people like Jack Parsons and or not Jack Parsons, but what's his name? Aleister Crowley made these people look really bad. There was a hoax called the Taxel hoax that you can look into. I go into very deeply in that 4-hour video that was shown to be complete fabrication in the 1800s, that basically the whole goal was to say that Pike worshipped Satan. He was their main leader. He did all these crazy things. And on top of that, there was a letter written to a dude in Italy who had this organization that really hated the Catholic Church. And there's this forged letter from 1871, allegedly. There's no evidence of it being real up until like the 50s, but it predicted 3 world wars. 2 of them came true, but if it was written in the 50s, they would have had it right. And the third one is the only thing that people that I believe to be any sort of interest at all within the Masons. And the Third World War basically predicts this tension between Israel and Palestine, and there being a war between them, right? And it basically causing World War III. And we see a lot of that relevance today. But again, this is a known forgery. A lot of it is false. A lot of the rumors around Freemasonry is false. They just have an anthropocentric worldview where they believe in a lot of gnosis. They believe in man's gnosis over divine grace. And there's lots of perennialism within it that contradicts Catholic teachings. Now, some of the themes are these rituals that they do. They're not satanic. They're just kind of like plays that they enact with each other. There is the element of like the elite network, royal family. A lot of them are Freemasonry or in Freemasonry. If there's any sort of connection though with that, I would say it's more of a runoff of the corruption within the royal family and them being Freemasons. That's kind of the more common thing. Next is the deep state, the Trump tier enemy, right? These networks of unelected bureaucrats, CIA, FBI, Pentagon, Hill Dog, Hillary Clinton, Pizzagate, wearing faces on Epstein Island, all this craziness, certain leaks, Snowden, Watergate, MK Ultra, 9/11. This is the Trump tier enemy. And it's just kind of as low tier as the Illuminati. None of us can really prove it. It's low tier. I'm not going to say too much else about it. The next is the globalists. This is the Alex Jones tier enemy, right? Certain things like the Council on Foreign Relations, the World Economic Forum, the Trilateral Commission that we briefly touched on earlier. These are the things seen as the globalist headquarters, pushing this idea of one world government. Klaus Schwab, David Rockefeller, these are the poster boys, right? And these organizations, 1921, 1973, 1971, they were basically to align certain elites within the West during these big global shifts. Certain of their things that have been publicly shown that make people attach them to these conspiracies are the whole, you're going to own nothing and you're going to be happy. Communist, Marxist ideals, the idea of a digital ID, super control, this idea of a great reset, and the whole open borders thing. There is lots of credibility with this. But again, as we'll see in a second, there's so many players within this framework that, again, it's an Alex Jones level thing, and you can't actually pin the tail on the donkey here as a specific threat, or as a specific only enemy. Next, the Bilderberg Group. They launched in 1954. They have an annual meeting of all sorts of politicians, bankers, and moguls plotting different strategies, right? Lots of people see this, just like the globalists, as like a war room for the New World Order, cooking up things, crashes, financial crashes, and again, this idea of the one world government. This was born in the Cold War, just like I showed you with a lot of these organizations, to unify these Western powers, right? It's always about power with all of these people. It's not about a common good. The whole idea is a power dynamic. The whole closed door thing within all of these societies is what really insinuates a lot of people's interest into thinking that they're corrupt. But then there's also a lot of scandals that come to the surface, so take that as you will. Their themes, global crisis, or certain themes that people attribute to them, are summits, secret summits as power consolidation, global crises as their tools, scripting the world's future, and they say that they're the visible tip of this hidden power structure. Next is one of my favorites, the Rothschilds, this Jewish banking dynasty from the 18th century. They are accused of controlling the banks, wars, and the governments from the Napoleonic era to World War I. And a lot of the conspiracy theorists would say even to today. Again, they claim that they control the central banks, they dictate the monetary policy, and they manipulate the markets to keep the nations in debt. Their 19th century dominance was financing Britain's war efforts, stabilizing Austria's economy, and this gave them outsized influence. Certain things which I couldn't find any concrete, non-conspiratorial proof for were things like Nathan Rothschild profiting from Waterloo by manipulating markets, right? The Rothschilds fund both sides of every war. This is the narrative. Profiting from destruction while shaping global outcomes. Another popular thing is that they use this Jewish identity to shield their schemes. Certain people say that they're not just Jewish, they're Luciferians. They're running these rituals with those Bilderberg people to summon this power, dude, and they have all these parties where they sacrifice babies and stuff. People say that their tool is Zionism and that they funded Israel to control oil and destabilize the Middle East, all while playing this victim card, right? Now, there are other fringe claims that you can find. Again, these conspiracies go so deep. You'll find certain things like that they're lizard people, that they have ancient tech. I mean, it gets crazy, and it's just wild, right? Then one of my favorite stories or narratives about them is this like story with them and Churchill and Hitler in World War II. And it basically goes like this. Through this banking network that they have, they indirectly financed Hitler's regime using like intermediaries, like certain industrialists in Germany or international banks that they had there. And certain people point to the Bank for International Settlements, founded in 1930, and these were their tools that they orchestrated this relationship with the Nazis, all right? And then after that, they go back into Britain, and they propped up Churchill's effort during this war, and it led to lending to Britain this money. So they're financing the Nazis, they're financing Churchill, and then you go to Stalin, and this is where you tie in the Bolsheviks, where they claim that they used him kind of like a pawn in between, and they supported the Bolsheviks earlier, and they kept... The whole narrative is that they're these puppet masters with every single major power, and they're financing this person, they're financing this person, they're using these figureheads as pawns, if you have it, wars, genocides, all these things. And basically, the whole plot comes down to forming Israel as like their headquarters, basically. And this conspiracy unravels itself further and further and further, where people will claim that like the Holocaust was a deliberate plot by them. This is like the most common like Groyper belief, the whole Nick Fuentes people. It's that the Rothschilds were basically the cause of it. If they're not going to deny the numbers, and they're going to be one of like the Groypers who basically say that it happened, they're going to usually blame it on these Rothschilds, and that's their connection to like the Jews, right? But by funding these atrocities, they engineered this Jewish suffering to garner this sympathy and, to fund or to establish Israel in 1948. Then, after the Rothschilds, you have another conspiracy of who is they, is this idea of the Khazarian mafia. You have this protocols of Zion that comes out, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. This gets into like the Rumble documentary territory, where there's like 5-hour Rumble documentaries that people waste their time watching on this stuff. Basically a lot of it is tied in with QAnon, right? But it goes along the lines that Ashkenazi Jews that descended from the Khazar Empire, they're the ones that run the finance. People say that those people are the Rothschilds, right? And it's rooted in this protocols. And just like I said earlier, this Pike letter to Mazzini, and again, I did a 4-hour video on the Freemasons, I think it was like a couple weeks ago if you want to see that. But these are forged documents that have been proven to be forged, and they have elements of truth, so it leads lots of people to buy into it. Now, the next identification of the they that people say is the tech billionaires. You have Gates, Bezos, Musk, Zuckerberg. You have Larry Ellison, all sorts of different people. You have Sam Altman. This narrative that these tech titans are running the world through these wealth and the facade of philanthropy to control narratives and policies, right? And people use the justification for this is the monopolies that they have, Amazon's, retail, Meta's, Facebook and Instagram, and Elon Musk's on X. And basically it goes like this. Gates's vaccine obsessionation is a depopulation scheme masked as charity. Bezos's Amazon, it's a surveillance grid. Zuckerberg's Meta is mind control via algorithms. And it all ties into some form of like an AI-driven digital prison, all tied to these globalist agendas. And I don't think they have as much power as people say they do. They definitely have their hands in the cookie jar. But the real bad thing with these people here is the idea of transhumanism. And they all seem to push this transhumanistic idea. Next one, the Vatican and the Jesuits, right? Again, I'm trying to riff through these really quickly. But you have 2,000 years, billions of assets, 1.3 billion followers, and the conspiracy is that the Jesuits pull these strings behind the wars and the banks. The church was the medieval European kingmaker. They were the deciders on it. The Pope was people say that the Pope was the rock star back then. They launched the Crusades, and since 1540, the Jesuits were behind all these political things as like the operative, like the CIA of the Vatican. And people link this guy, Father Arturo Sosa. They call him the Black Pope. You can read a lot about this if you're interested. They link him to Freemasonry and other stuff. People link it to the Nazis in South America. They say, oh, Pope Francis was the thing. Again, this is another circular theory, in my opinion. doesn't really go much of anywhere. It's kind of a Alex Jones level argument. And yeah, there is corruption within the Vatican, but I'll just leave it with Judas was an apostle for a reason. I mean, it just shows to bolster our faith in that human corruption within the Holy Church does not disprove or should not break someone's faith. Next, this is the fun one. This is the one where I gotta take a breath and think about how I'm gonna approach this, especially on YouTube. The most common nowadays group that most people say run the world is the Jews. Most people say the Zionists, but a select few will just outright say the Jews. What makes this plausible? What makes people buy into this? Jewish elites, often tied to Zionism, control finance, media, and politics. And certain figures like George Soros do some crazy things when you look into it. You also have an overrepresentation in certain places of power. You have a lot of cultural pushes of degeneracy, things like lots of foundations, like certain pornography is pushed. You have certain connections within the Mossad and Epstein and this blackmail cabal. Lots of influence from this Jewish Kabbalah and it bleeding into other things as like this place, as like this starting place for a lot of the ills of other ideologies. Going back, you have that Pike's letter that I mentioned. You have the Wailing Wall and all these elites going to the Wailing Wall and bowing down and kissing it. You have this idea of the third temple being built. And you have Christian Zionists, which you cannot be if you're a Christian. It makes literally no sense. We have the new law. We have the new law written on our hearts, okay? We are the new Israel. There is no more Israel. All of the beliefs of the Jew come from their idea of a oral Torah. We have the true oral and written Torah, the Holy Bible, and the traditions of the Holy Catholic Church written down by the Church Fathers. All of their stuff is rabbinical Judaism, which is way after the fact and has no resemblance to Second Temple Judaism, and let alone First Temple Judaism. You look in the Bible and learn about what it is, you don't see it replicated at all in our current society. So people do not like this idea of rebuilding the third temple, especially traditional Christians. Certain events like 9/11 and other things people say were orchestrated by these desert financiers, if you will, to basically bolster the hatred towards Muslims in favor towards the desert financiers. Next, you have certain figures like online, like Rabbi Shmuley and all these obnoxious desert financier figures that, in my personal opinion, their whole act is to be as insufferable as possible to make people hate them, to gain a group of people, or to make more people hate them, so more people think that they're hated, so they get perceived as the victim even more. It's really complicated. You have the whole idea of the 109 countries. You have Holocaust denial and all these different cloudy events surrounding World War II, new emerging groups like the Groypers, and you have the idea of the tribe. The 10 Commandments only pertain to members in the tribe. That is shown throughout history. Let's not kid ourselves here. Do I think these is the donkey that we must pin the tail on? No. As I've mentioned several previous groups that have a unsurmountable amount of power, I do not think it is Jews. I've seen too many contradictions. I've seen groups that hate Zionism in Judaism. I've seen Jewish groups that do not like the state of Israel. I've seen groups of Judaism that really do not like the idea of a third temple. So for me to pedestalize this as being the figurehead, the name of they, it's ridiculous. All right? It is ridiculous. There are exceptions, and there are enough exceptions to kind of not disprove it. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying there is no influence. I'm not saying there is no Zionist control. There is no, like, over-representation. I'm not saying that at all, because there is that. I'm just saying it gets down to, like, I mean, I just see a lot of, like, hatred towards a lot of these things. And it just stems from a lack of faith in God and a lack of belief in Genesis of all men being created in the image of God. And, yeah. Next, BlackRock and Vanguard. This is another Trump-level popular one that people like to talk about. BlackRock has 11.5 trillion AUM, trillion dollars, right? Vanguard is attributed to having 10.4, and these are asset management giants holding stakes in basically every major corporation, everything from Apple to Pepsi to Pfizer. People link this Pfizer thing to the corona, to all of it in between. Many people call them puppet masters, using these shareholder votes to dictate these moves. And then they have this Aladdin algorithm that handles this $21.6 trillion. And it is seen as a rigging AI. Alright? And we've all heard this, so I'm not going to harp too much on it, but it definitely is a major player in this game here. So, what is the most possible narrative? This is what I have devised. Groups like Bilderberg, CFR, Trilateral Commission, and WEF are real coordination hubs, not just the think tanks they want you to think they are. They align Western elites, bankers, CEOs to push technocratic globalist agendas. BlackRock and Vanguard fit here. They're the financial muscle enforcing corporate compliance through these big companies. Dude, why is all the companies liberal and gay? Elites use occult philosophies, not just finance and policy, to shape culture, and Hollywood and other media assets are tools. They embed symbols and narratives, transhumanism, dystopia, skepticism, empiricism, scientism, to condition the masses. The deep state, CIA, MI6, Mossad, they're not just bureaucrats. These are the muscle that actually run these psyops and coups and the blackmail, right? Epstein as a prime example. Banking dynasties like the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, etc. These and modern giants like BlackRock, again, they're the economic backbone. The central banks like the Fed are their tools, printing money, and they enslave us via debt. Now, the media, academia, and religion, Protestants, the occult, this advancement of anthropocentrism, these are the fronts for the social engineering, right? And the Jews and the Zionists, these are often, while they are overrepresented in certain places, there is a history of this push of degeneracy. They're mostly scapegoats, distracting from this broader syndicate that we really have, right? Like I have shown, there are a ton of players in this. And to boil it down to one they, oh, it's the Jesuits, oh, it's the globalists, oh, it's the deep state, oh, it's the this. They're all playing together, all right? When you boil it down to one specific thing, it's just ridiculous. And it distracts people from realizing how broad of a scope this power play, that's what it is. None of this stuff is for the greater good. It's all a power play, right? And I'll even, as a Catholic, agree. Post-Vatican II reforms definitely have opened the door to globalist infiltration, right? But, like I said earlier, there's a reason within the gospel why Judas is an apostle. It's the showing of the flaw of human nature, of being in sin. There will be corruption. There will be bad popes. There will be bad people in the magisterium. But as the collective, the church, it is governed by the Holy Spirit. So it will not, there will be ups and downs, but it will never fall. It will always, the hell will never prevail against it, right? And what I see is that this New Age, this idea of New Age combining all the religions, atheism was tried for a little bit, right? The New Atheist movement, it was tried. You could even say that it was like orchestrated to push people towards nihilism for a time. But it was tried, and then you have now this New Age movement, right? I'd say 90% of people, or not 90%, like 50% of people that I see are agnostic in some fashion or form, right? And then a lot of them end up getting convinced by some sort of New Age narrative, right? In terms of their spirituality, they realize atheism is gay. They realize that agnosticism, while they might not philosophically know that this mass skepticism is divorced from truth and divorced from absolutes, they eventually go searching subconsciously. And it always, with this media that we have nowadays, with TikTok and Instagram and all these like TikToks of like, bruh, and the Atlanteans made the pyramids, and we were doing this and doing that, and God, the earth is actually flat, and God lives in the North Star, you see? All this crazy, esoteric, Protestant nonsense. They're going to be pushed into this New Age as the new religion. And you see this within a lot of these movements orchestrated by this group of people, right? Always pushing theosophy, pushing this like esotericism from Aleister Crowley, pushing this be your own God, worship creativity, all these narratives, right? So what should we do about it? Should we become some sort of debate bro? Debate me, bro. Debate me, bro. Should we become some sort of extremist? Should we become some sort of prepper? Or should we just go full Ted Kaczynski, start worshiping nature, get rid of it all, and go live in the woods? I don't think so. I believe that the goal here for Catholics is to avoid naivety, right? Like I said, I posed this dynamic. The boomer generation really bought into the canon completely without much questioning. And their narrative of like the whole love movement and everything like that directed into a lot of naivety, which resulted in the millennial 90s generation of the South Park goths. Everything's fake and gay, dude. Everything's fake and gay. And now, as the Gen Z generation with the internet, like I posed with the time during COVID, to stop and see, to step out of the machine as a cog, to be cleaned and look around and see what's going on, we're given the opportunity to not be so cynical and also not be so naive. We are able to live more balanced in a normal life. And what I would suggest, rooted in this conviction that Christ is the true King, and we should not worry about any of this stuff going on. None of it can prevail against the true King. Whenever we talk about who is the they, and we put one of these identifiers of some organization, some religious group, all we're doing is acting out of fear. When in reality, the true they running the world is Christ, and we have nothing to worry about, right? But modern culture will have you think otherwise, right? You got to navigate this without buying into these things, becoming chronically online, and allowing these conspiracies to undermine faith. All of these things, true or false, all they're really doing is revealing that these institutions, secular society, they value the self and power more than they value truth and God. And once you realize that, that's all you need to know. That's the only pair of glasses you need to know. You can spend the rest of your time focusing on the Lord, focusing on the ascetical life, focusing on progressing towards God. Stay informed through credible sources, limit exposure to this type of sensational content, right? We are called as Catholics to live out our vocation, whether we are parents, educators, workers, some sort of religious vocation, artists. We are supposed to live with diligence, but also love. St. Paul instructs us, whatever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord. Let's build real-world relationships. As I've mentioned earlier, whether you're into like this online debate sphere of like orthodoxy and Catholicism, where it's just so uncharitable that it gets ridiculous at times and almost non-Christian, you go into your parish, you go into your family and friends, and none of this malice is there. Most people nowadays are conditioned to not even talk about religion or politics. So whenever you go with your family, it's not even like a debate to be had. This kind of should not be. We should, if we are true believers in the traditional Catholic faith, we should not believe in as much the Enlightenment ideal of separation of church and state, right? God sets up patriarchies throughout Scripture. You could also argue against this, that God gave them in the book of Kings, he gave them a king at their own will, not because they actually needed it, but it was instituted. That idea of patriarchy in government was instituted in this addiction towards this idea of separation, freedom, liberty, all these concepts. They should really be viewed through this traditional Catholic lens. And what I'm getting at with this is most of these narratives that we see online, these back and forths, not only does this online debate harden your heart, right, especially towards your fellow Christians, but it's just not how it actually is in the real world. I hang out with people from my Catholic parish that come and spend time with my family, and my family is Protestants, and I'm a Catholic with these people, and none of us are arguing over who's going to hell and who's damned. If we talk about Christ, we're talking about the love for Christ, and we might educate each other on each other's positions. Now, as a Catholic, I hope they come to the fullness of the truth, but I will convince them so with charity. Now, this counters the isolation of these echo chambers, right? And it fosters an authentic connection which people need. We must limit time on these platforms. They amplify conspiracies and, so, like I just said, these divisive narratives. Instead, we should obviously be prioritizing prayer. We should prioritize scripture, works of charity, things that actually anchor us into reality and not into this abstract online religiosity. No elite agenda can thwart God's providence. I cannot say this enough. There's not even a reason for me to make this video other than I put all my topics into this box, and these were the two that I drew out of the box to talk about for this video. Certain conspiracies, like I mentioned, MKUltra, elite influence, Epstein's Island, the list, all they are doing is just revealing the sinfulness of us human beings. And they are ultimately subject to God's judgment. In the Psalms, 2nd Psalm, verse 4, it states, "He who sits in the heavens laughs at the plans of the wicked," right? We must recognize materialism's denial of the spiritual and use Catholic social teaching to critique it. Avoid these endless online debates, though, and certain circular historical conspiracies, as I've shown. You can critique it, you can inform others, but spending too much time on them is a loss. We must live as witnesses to the gospel, right? This is what our time should be taken up as. Like, we don't have to sit here and be Cliff Knettle going out to a college, right? That's not what we are forced to do as Catholics. But if our conversations consist more of, do the Jews run the world, dude? The desert financiers, are they the ones? Bro, it's the globalists. No, it's this. Or everything's fake and gay, bro. Conspiracy theory here, conspiracy theory there. It just shows something lacking. I mean, this gospel message should be ingrained in our speech, in our narratives, way more than some sort of materialistic influence, right? Live in the world, but do not be of it. Do not go full Ted K. Don't start worshiping nature. Some people, they get so disheartened by all these conspiracies, by all these agendas, by all these things, and they're like, dude, I'm just going to move to Alaska and be in nature. And then they start doing nature worship, and like, they don't understand the Catholic dogma of live in the world. Live in the world. Don't all have to be monks. We don't all have to take a disavow things. We don't all have to be completely celibate. We don't all have to be priests. There are, through God's providence, through God's plan, there are hundreds of different vocations. We are the character in God's book of life, and our goal should be to unite our will with God's will. So whatever vocation we do is just we become a tool for the Lord. And through that unification of our will to His, we align ourselves more with the knowledge of God towards being saints, towards theosis, right? Don't join the online extreme groups that preach that they're Catholic, and then they preach eugenics, and then someone calls them out. Hey, dude, Genesis, everyone's made in the image of God. How can you say eugenics is cool? Yeah, you might have some proof that the Holocaust has some questionable elements about it, but how can you deny certain projects? Like, there is a verifiable... I did a bunch of research about this last year, right? Holocaust stuff. And there is no way to get around over 200-something thousand deaths from eugenics experiments. That is not Catholic. That is very anti-Catholic, no matter which way you want to spin it. And then when you call them out on this, they run and hide behind some sort of political agenda, because that is what they worship. They can use the guise of Catholicism, right? But in truth, they are not worshiping Christ. They say they're worshiping Christ. They might act like it. They may even say a few prayers. But they're so wrapped up in their career. They are so wrapped up in the actual political agenda that could be taking place that they lose the plot entirely. They lose the plot entirely. It's ridiculous. Don't be a full-on consumer either. Anticipation should be things like Lent, Advent, feast days, Mass, conversations about Catholicism. Not like most people's in the secular society. Oh, dude, did you see Endgame? Oh, dude, the GTA 6, bro, GTA 6. It's like little kids anticipating their newest Funko Pop drop. It's ridiculous. Be anticipatory about the Catholic things, about the liturgical calendar, not the secular calendar. Last thing I'll leave this with before I abruptly end it, because I do gotta go. Saint John Paul II quoted our Lord in his first open words, "Do not be afraid." This is the only thing that we have to take as Catholics. All this stuff can be so fascinating and interesting. Do we accept the canon? Do we believe this is real or this is fake? All these things show otherwise. who's controlling everything? Who's the people moving the machine? Who cares? I just gave like an hour and some change about who it actually could be, about what's actually, how do we discern real or fake? But who cares? Just don't be afraid. Christ is king over all. He is really the one in charge. Anyway, boys, I got a next video coming up, like I said earlier, history of Western mysticism and esotericism video that I'll touch on next time.